public for several weeks now, but this is the first we've heard him speak.
Everyone, and
let's listen.
Thank you for being here. 2 years ago, the acting Attorney General asked me to serve as special counsel, and he created the Special Counsel's Office. The appointment order directed the office to investigate Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. This included investigating any links or coordination between the Russian government and individuals associated with the Trump campaign. Now, I have not spoken publicly during our investigation. I'm speaking out today because our investigation is complete. The Attorney General has made the report on our investigation largely public. We are formally closing the Special Counsel's office, and as well, I'm resigning from the Department of Justice to return to private life. I'll make a few remarks about the results of our work. But beyond these few remarks, it is important that the office's written work speak for itself. Let me begin where the appointment order begins, and that is interference in the 2016 presidential election. As alleged by the grand jury in an indictment, Russian intelligence officers who were part of the Russian military launched a concerted attack on our political system. The indictment alleges that they used sophisticated cyber techniques to hack into computers and networks used by the Clinton campaign. They stole private information and then released that information through fake online identities and through the organization WikiLeaks. The releases were designed and timed to interfere with our election and to damage a presidential candidate. And at the same time, as the grand jury alleged in a separate indictment, a private Russian entity engaged in a social media operation where Russian citizens posed as Americans in order to influence an election. These indictments contain allegations, and we are not commenting on the guilt or the innocence of any specific defendant. Every defendant is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty. The indictments allege, and the other activities in our report describe, efforts to interfere in our political system. They needed to be investigated and understood, and that is among the reasons why the Department of Justice established our office. That is also a reason we investigated efforts to obstruct the investigation. The matters we investigated were of paramount importance. It was critical for us to obtain full and accurate information from every person we questioned. When a subject of an investigation obstructs that investigation or lies to investigators, it strikes at the core of their government's effort to find the truth and hold wrongdoers accountable. Let me say a word about the report. The report has two parts, addressing the two main issues we were asked to investigate. The first volume of the report details numerous efforts emanating from Russia to influence the election. This volume includes a discussion of the Trump campaign's response to this activity, as well as our conclusion that there was insufficient evidence to charge a broader conspiracy. And in the second volume, the report describes the results and analysis of our obstruction of justice investigation involving the president. The order appointing me special counsel authorized us to investigate actions that could obstruct the investigation. And we conducted that investigation, and we kept the office of the acting Attorney General apprised of the progress of our work. And as set forth in the report, after that investigation, if we had had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so. We did not, however, make a determination as to whether the president did commit a crime. The introduction to the Volume 2 of our report explains that decision. It explains that under long-standing department policy, a president cannot be charged with a federal crime while he is in office. That is unconstitutional. Even if the charge is kept under seal and hidden from public view, that too is prohibited. The Special Counsel's Office is part of the Department of Justice, and by regulation, it was bound by that department policy. Charging the president with a crime was therefore not an option we could consider. The department's written opinion explaining the policy makes several important points that further informed our handling of the obstruction investigation. Those points are summarized in our report, and I will describe two of them for you. First, the opinion explicitly permits the investigation of a sitting president because it is important to preserve evidence while memories are fresh and documents available. Among other things, that evidence could be used if there were co-conspirators who could be charged now. And second, the opinion says that the Constitution requires a process other than the criminal justice system to formally accuse a sitting president of wrongdoing. And beyond department policy, we were guided by principles of fairness. It would be unfair to potentially accuse somebody of a crime when there can be no court resolution of the actual charge. So that was Justice Department policy. Those were the principles under which we operated, and from them we concluded that we would not reach a determination one way or the other about whether the president committed a crime. That is the office's final position, and we will not comment on any other conclusions or hypotheticals about the president. We conducted an independent criminal investigation and reported the results to the Attorney General, as required by department regulations. The Attorney General then concluded that it was appropriate to provide our report to Congress and to the American people. At one point in time, I requested that certain portions of the report be released. The Attorney General preferred to make the entire report public all at once, and we appreciate that the Attorney General made the report largely public, and I certainly do not question the Attorney General's good faith in that decision. Now, I hope and expect this to be the only time that I will speak to you in this manner. I am making that decision myself. No one has told me whether I can or should testify or speak further about this matter. There has been discussion about an appearance before Congress. Any testimony from this office would not go beyond our report. It contains our findings and analysis and the reasons for the decisions we made. We chose those words carefully, and the work speaks for itself. And the report is my testimony. I would not provide information beyond that which is already public in any appearance before Congress. In addition, access to our underlying work product is being decided in a process that does not involve our office. So beyond what I've said here today and what is contained in our written work, I do not believe it is appropriate for me to speak further about the investigation or to comment on the actions of the Justice Department or Congress. And it's for that reason I will not be taking questions today as well. Now, before I step away, I want to thank the attorneys, the FBI agents, the analysts, the professional staff who helped us conduct this investigation in a fair and independent manner. These individuals, who spent nearly 2 years with the Special Counsel's Office, were of the highest integrity. And I will close by reiterating the central allegation of our indictments, that there were multiple, systematic efforts to interfere in our election. And that allegation deserves the attention of every American. Thank you. Thank you for being here today.
Special Counsel Robert Mueller of the Justice Department just giving his first and what he says will be his only public remarks on the almost 2-year investigation he conducted into Russia's interference into the 2016 election. Importantly, he emphasized the aspect of the report that dealt with whether or not President Trump obstructed justice in this matter. He said, as the report said, if they had evidence that the president did not commit a crime, that the report would have said so. He emphasized that it didn't say so. And he emphasized that he and the office were bound by long-standing Department of Justice policy that states a sitting president cannot be indicted. He indicated that the Constitution provides for other means for dealing with the president in these circumstances. And most importantly, he has asserted that he will not testify before Congress. I want to go to Pete Williams, who was in that room. He's on the 7th floor of the Justice Department this morning. Pete, he didn't go outside the report. He also has said he doesn't want to testify before Congress. It may be that Congress itself has a say in that. How do you expect this to play out?
Well, this was his valedictory speech, I think. Really, it was a formal end to the investigation. He decided he didn't want to make a public statement. Most of it, you're right, was a summary of this written report. What he did say is nobody has told me whether or not I can or should testify before Congress. So that clearly is up to him. And he said if he does testify, though, don't get your hopes up. He's not going to go beyond what's in the four corners of his report. And he also said, I think it's interesting, the special counsel's office basically, as of today, ceases to exist. It largely ceased to exist several weeks ago when the report itself was turned in, but he was still doing some mopping up work. But now any discussion between Congress and the Justice Department about whether and if the underlying materials that his people gathered will be available, he's going to be out of that entirely. He's going to go back to being a private citizen. So he's not going to be involved in that. I didn't hear him to say he's not going to testify. What I heard him to say is it's his decision alone, and if he is, it's not going to be very spectacular.
Well, right. What he said is, I don't believe it would be appropriate to speak further. The fact of the matter, as you well know, is that Congress does have the power of subpoena, so it may force the issue. But it is very clear, as I turn to Casey Hunt, who covers Capitol Hill for us, that Robert Mueller is trying to say to Congress, you are barking up the wrong tree if you try to force this. I'm not going to say anything outside what is in that report. You can fight over the underlying materials, but I'm not your guy if you're looking to have me come up here on Capitol Hill and testify.
And Savannah, this had been what we had been hearing from the committee in the weeks leading up to this momentous statement today, that Robert Mueller seemed reluctant to participate in what would be most likely a public spectacle, because really, he has been saying, as he underscored in public for the first time today, that the report does speak for itself, and therefore any value that would be added by him coming before cameras would really be dramatic, as opposed to being substantive and adding to the record of what we know here. But Savannah, you hit on exactly what is the big question, and I've already put this to sources on Capitol Hill to see whether or not the House Judiciary Committee is going to send Robert Mueller a subpoena. We have seen the Trump administration obviously flout subpoenas left and right, refuse to cooperate with Congress. But as we heard, Robert Mueller, now a private citizen, and also somebody who is a very careful observer and followers of the norms, rules, and practices that govern how all of this is supposed to unfold. I think he underscored that himself. I mean, we had been reporting it extensively throughout the course of this investigation, but you heard him make reference to it as well in describing how he made his decision about whether or not they could charge the president of the United States with a crime. So I do think you're going to see potentially a different set of circumstances play out in the event that Congress does send Robert Mueller a subpoena. So again, we don't yet have an answer to this critical question, but of course, House Democrats control the House of Representatives. They control the gavels in those committees. And frankly, our eyes are turned toward what they are going to do next in terms of trying to get more answers, Savannah.
Let me go to Chuck Todd, who's with you there in Washington. This is going to be a matter of analyzing what Robert Mueller chose to emphasize from his report. He gave a 9-minute statement, and what he chose to highlight is important. One of the things he mentions and goes out of his way to say is that this DOJ opinion that says you can't indict, you can't criminally charge a sitting president, says that the Constitution requires a process other than the criminal justice system to formally accuse a sitting president of wrongdoing. He's, without using that word, reminding folks that there is a process, and it's called impeachment.
Oh, Savannah, I think that's the news out of here, is that he, in case anybody wasn't sure how to interpret the introduction to Part 2 of the Mueller report, Robert Mueller now told you how to interpret it, which is simply this report. It's up to you, Congress. You're the only one that can make the decision about whether or not a crime was committed here. The Constitution essentially doesn't permit the normal process. So in some ways, this is a rebuttal to Barr. And I think the single most important sentence he uttered is this: we chose the words carefully, meaning about the report itself, but that's also about Mueller's statement today. He chose his words carefully. Notice how he described part one. Bill Barr described it as a total exoneration. He said insufficient evidence to charge a broader conspiracy, right? How you choose to word something says a lot, if you will. This is Bob Mueller simply saying there wasn't enough to charge a crime here. That doesn't mean there wasn't behavior, perhaps, that we found suspicious. But I think the larger headline in this is Bob Mueller is making it crystal clear to Congress: I did this report assuming this was your call, not the Justice Department's call. This was your call. I think he basically said it pretty straightforwardly.
Well, it's interesting because there had been some confusion, as you well know, Chuck, about this issue of why Robert Mueller chose not to make a prosecutorial decision, why he chose not to say whether or not the president could be charged with obstruction of justice. Bill Barr, the Attorney General, when initially announcing the results of the Mueller report, said that he concluded there was no obstruction of justice case, and he said that had nothing to do with that Department of Justice rule that states you can't indict a sitting president. But Robert Mueller has made crystal clear today that he was, in fact, bound by and guided by that Department of Justice rule that says a sitting president may not be criminally prosecuted. That is what he said in black and white. It seemed like he wanted to make sure that that issue had been settled.
And not only that, I thought it was interesting how he chose, where he chose to praise the Attorney General. And he said he largely released the report, and we are glad he did we glad he did that in that decision. You know, it was basically ignoring part one of what Barr did, but in some ways, and I perhaps am giving a hint of what I think you're going to see a lot on cable today. Take Bill Barr and take Robert Mueller, and basically put them side by side, how Barr interpreted the report and how Mueller basically, it's a rebuttal. And this is the statement I think that he thought a neutral Attorney General would have given had they read the report the way Mueller intended for the report to be read.
Well, let's go to Peter Alexander, who's at the White House. And of course, Peter, we recall that many at the White House were stating that the Mueller report was a complete exoneration. Yep. Now we're hearing from Robert Mueller. How do you think this is going to go over at the White House today?
Well, Savannah, I think you put your finger on it right there. With every megaphone the president had by Twitter, through placards on podiums, and through comments of his aides and advisors, the president, for the course of the last month and a half, has tried to basically make that case that this is a total exoneration. Well, now very clearly from Robert Mueller, we heard, in effect, a different story. He said by not charging Donald Trump, they're not saying that he didn't commit crimes, just that they are not going to pursue him for the potential that he committed any crimes, which now leaves it to Congress. The president, in the course of the last month and a half, has tweeted Robert Mueller's name more than 70 times. On Friday, he said it would be ridiculous that Mueller would testify. So I think the White House will be happy to hear that this may be the final word from Robert Mueller, but it's certainly not the word that they were hoping to hear today. In my conversations with aides over the course of this day, we got the indication that the White House was notified that Mueller would make a statement today. They learned about it last night. The president was notified as well, but there was no indication that they knew exactly what he would say. And in the conversations going into this, they seemed to indicate they thought he would resign from the Department of Justice, from the Special Counsel's office, that he would be shutting it down as he announced, but that the focus would be heavily on that and on the fact that he wouldn't testify. They were, in effect, trying to steer clear of what seems to be the real headline that came out of this today. The president has no scheduled public events today. He has some private meetings with the Secretary of State, with the Vice President. So there was no opportunity, at least to this point, for reporters to press the president on his findings here. But it certainly does complicate the argument that he has been making, what he and his allies have been insisting would be their argument for the course of the campaign, that he has been totally exonerated here, when Robert Mueller said, in fact, there is no exoneration.
Lots to chew over here. Let's talk to Andrea Mitchell, who covers foreign affairs. And the first part of Mueller's statement, in also can be interpreted to say he was justifying the whole purpose and the genesis of this Russia investigation in the first place. He talked about the investigation establishing that an arm of the Russian military and intelligence services of Russia had interfered in the election, had a hacking campaign, that there was a private Russian entity that had engaged in a social media influence campaign. And he said these matters needed to be investigated and understood. In a way, it felt like he was trying to justify why it was that the special counsel was appointed in the first place.
Absolutely, and I think he may be signaling that he feels that not enough attention was paid to that first section with all of the reports from the White House and the president, of course, specifically saying no collusion, that he wanted to emphasize that, as he said, every American should be concerned about this attack. He went into more detail than one might expect in this statement about that original indictment against the Russians a year ago, June. I also think it's very important to emphasize that he said, I hope and expect that this will be the only time that I speak to you in this manner. And he is saying that the report is his testimony. He's saying to the Congress, as you've noted, that he does not want to appear and that he will not go beyond the four corners of his report. And so it is now going to be conflicting pressure, of course. A lot of people in the Democratic Party in particular are going to be demanding that they force a subpoena, to force him to appear, to push this as far as they can. But others will say that this is an unnecessary piling on and that, in fact, he will not go beyond it. So it would just be the political spectacle that he has certainly signaled he does not want to participate in. I think it's very significant that he spoke so clearly about saying also that he did not find that the president did not commit a crime. He's just saying that they did not conclude anything because of those regulations and that practice, that the president cannot be indicted and it would be unfair to even have a sealed indictment, that the only reason to have the investigation, that there's plenty of reason to have the investigation to preserve the testimony while it is still fresh and to preserve the possibility of using it against co-conspirators. Savannah.
And he went one step further, Andrea, as you know. He said if we could have concluded and cleared him of a crime, we would have done so, but we didn't do that. Let's play a little bit of Robert Mueller's speech a few minutes ago. Take a listen.
And as set forth in the report, after that investigation, if we had had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so. We did not, however, make a determination as to whether the president did commit a crime. The introduction to the Volume 2 of our report explains that decision. It explains that under long-standing department policy, a president cannot be charged with a federal crime while he is in office. That is unconstitutional. Even if the charge is kept under seal and hidden from public view, that too is prohibited. The special counsel's office is part of the Department of Justice, and by regulation, it was bound by that department policy. Charging the president with a crime was therefore not an option we could consider.
Let's go to Pete Williams, our justice correspondent, who's made his way outside the department there in Washington, D.C. Pete, as you've had a chance to marinate in this statement, what are you reflecting on? What do you think are the takeaways?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, talking to some members of his staff who were in the room to hear this valedictory speech by Mueller, it's quite clear that he has no intention, just to be clear, I think you picked this up, he has no intention of testifying before Congress. He said, this report is my testimony. And he said, I hope and expect this is the only time I will speak about this matter. So no question, he does not want to testify before Congress. You may have heard there was a question shouted to him as he walked away, what if you're subpoenaed? And he said, no questions. Secondly, fundamentally, there is nothing in his remarks here that goes beyond what the report said. So all of the discussion you've been having about the fact that Mueller said, you know, we can't say the president didn't commit a crime, that's in the report. So that remark does not go beyond the report. The only thing that I think is new here is, and this gets a little bit processy, but the only thing I think is new is when the special counsel staff made the decision that they would not say whether or not the president committed a crime, that they would not reach a conclusion about that. And the answer is from the beginning. He said that because it would be unconstitutional to charge a president with a crime, charging the president with a crime was therefore not an option we could consider. So one of the puzzles to us has been, what did they do? Did they assemble all the evidence and then say, okay, let's decide whether the president committed a crime? Oops, we can't do that because we're not allowed to. That didn't come at the end, that came at the beginning. But nonetheless, he said, as the report says, we concluded we couldn't do this investigation because, in essence, a president isn't president forever. And if there were a crime, then someone theoretically could be charged after they leave office. But I think the only thing that I picked up here new was this sense that the going-in proposition was they knew they couldn't charge the president with a crime if they had found the evidence to indicate that he did so. They never did that calculus. But on the other hand, he said today, as the report says, that they also aren't saying that they can't say that he didn't commit a crime, that they couldn't exonerate him.
Well, exactly. So that is interesting. So they knew from the get-go, we're never going to render a prosecutorial decision against the president because we are forbidden from doing so.
Because we can't.
We're employees of the Justice Department,
Right.
is essentially what he said. But then he went on to say, you can investigate because we need to preserve evidence, to your point, because the president isn't president forever if there is a criminal case perhaps to be brought. And then he mentioned, Pete, this business about how the Constitution has another process to deal with the president in these circumstances. Let's go to Mimi Rocha, who is our legal analyst for NBC News. And Mimi, Pete is very, very correct there. Mueller didn't go outside the four squares of this report in anything that he said. On the other hand, it's a matter of emphasis and what he chose to highlight. What do you make of what he chose to single out today in his final and only comments on the matter, if he can help it?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, he didn't go outside the report. On the other hand, what he did is so valuable, and I think shows why it would be valuable if he testified before Congress, even if he only talked about what's in the report. Because the report is dense, and he's walking us through it. Here he did it in 8 or 9 minutes. He highlighted, first of all, something that we know because we've read the report, but maybe not everybody does because it's been sort of obfuscated by allies of Trump, frankly, and Trump himself, that Russia attacked our election. They interfered in, quote, a systematic way. Boom, that's it. That's important. And he's telling Americans, pay attention to that. Don't let that go by. Second, he said, here's why obstruction of justice is important to investigate. It strikes at the heart of our justice system. You cannot let those crimes go unattended, uninvestigated. Third, he said, without saying it explicitly the way that we've been saying it, but he made very clear that the president was not charged with a crime because he couldn't be, but that there is substantial evidence of obstruction of justice. He also said, with respect to the Trump campaign, that he didn't find evidence to charge a prosecutable crime against members of the campaign with Russia's interference. He didn't say anything about no collusion. And I think that's important because remember, after Barr's letter came out, before the report came out, the talking point became and still has been no collusion. And Mr. Mueller did not say that he didn't find collusion because that is not what he was looking for. So I think all of these points are really important that he chose to emphasize. And even if they're in the report, it shows the importance of walking the American public through these very basic points. And I hope that now Congress picks up that mantle more and does it in a more effective way. And I think that's what Mueller was asking them to do.
Well, that brings us from the lawyers, the expert in the law to the expert in politics, which is Chuck Todd. And Chuck, what do Democrats do now? Because, you know, the issue is whether they want to force it with Mueller. Mueller could not have been clearer that he has no desire to testify before Congress. He has said there's nothing to see here. The report speaks for itself. The report is my testimony, he said today. But Congress does have the power of the subpoena and can try to force it.
Well, they can, but I think the larger issue they got to deal with is this, right? Nancy Pelosi politically doesn't want to do impeachment. I think she's trying to buy time, get to the end of the summer and say, you know what, the presidential campaign is too far along. This is not healthy for the country. Let's let the election and we'll sort this out. Except she's got a problem now politically, Savannah, and that is this. Yesterday, you had a Republican member of Congress, granted it's somebody that's sort of seen as sort of out on his own island at times, Justin Amash, making the clearest case for impeachment that any member of Congress makes right now, and it happens to be a Republican. And now you have Robert Mueller, right, who speaks for the first time, and again, what everybody's noted here, what he chose to point out, his basically direct rebuttal to Bill Barr's characterization of everything Barr has done to this point, and him explicitly saying he believed only Congress could make this decision. So now there isn't a question of did Mueller intend Congress to do it. Mueller has said, I intended you to make this decision. And now you have Nancy Pelosi having to face the fact that she's got a growing chorus of Democrats that say it's time to impeach, and the person making the clearest case publicly is a Republican member of Congress. I just think the political pressure now in the leadership of the House to open an impeachment inquiry is only going to increase.
That brings us to Pete Williams, who's at the Justice Department. I know you wanted to get in on this issue of impeachment. Mueller didn't flat out say Congress is up to you, but he did point out that the Constitution provides a remedy and it's over to Congress, which of course refers to the impeachment process.
Yeah, process is the word he used. I'm looking at the text of his remarks now. The opinion says, this is quoting now, the opinion says that the Constitution requires a process other than the criminal justice system to formally accuse a sitting president of wrongdoing. I just think it's interesting that he put that sentence in. Yes, this was an 8-minute or so thing, but there's a lot he didn't say. This he chose to say, and in essence, it's just a line and a footnote in this 400-plus page report. So the fact that he chose to say it, I think, is interesting. It's an insight that it was very much on the minds of Mueller's staff. The only other point I wanted to make, Savannah, and I want to be as careful about this as I can, you know, I've covered Robert Mueller since he was the FBI director, held over for 12 years, kept tabs with him in the past. We've all aged since then. He's now 74. And I did think today that, you know, that may be a question on his mind as well. You know, at this point in his life, at this stage in his life, he's finished his job as special counsel. He wants to put it beyond him now, I think, and move on.
Well, he certainly has been at the red-hot center of political life for the last couple of years, and he said he wants to return to private life. We'll see if Congress lets him. Robert Mueller this morning at the Justice Department for the first time addressing his almost 2-year Russia investigation, talking about what his report concluded, what it found, and what it could not find. And he has now, by his remarks, set off another round of speculation about whether or not Congress will pick up where he left off. That question is also regards his testimony as well. He has said he does not want to testify before Congress and that it would be fruitless for him to do so. But now we will hear from members of Congress. We expect to hear a little bit later today from the Democratic chairman of the House Judiciary Committee about what his next move will be. And of course, watching all of this from the White House, the president, who obviously has a stake in all of this. We will continue to follow this. I'll be back with full details tonight on NBC Nightly News. For now, I'm Savannah Guthrie, NBC News in New York. Have a good day. Most of you return to regular programming.